According to the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, deforestation and forest degradation around the world have generated about 18% of all greenhouse gases, second only to the energy sector. Thus, sustainable forest management is not only important to the socio-economic life of each country in particular and the world in general, but also contributes greatly to the reduction of impact of natural disaster and active response to climate change in the world. This is the theme of the Forum on Opportunities for Sustainable Natural Forest Management, which was recently organized in Hanoi by the Norwegian Embassy in collaboration with various partners in Vietnam.
Hello and welcome to Sharing Vietnam. Vietnam is one of the countries with well-established forest management system in terms of policy, institution, management and decentralization. However, the progress of transforming from traditional to sustainable forest management has encountered challenges. Today, let's have a talk with Mr. Kamal Mahota from UNDP to get to know more about the opportunities for Vietnam in this sector. Hello, thank you for joining our show today. What is the role of forest management in achieving the UN's SDGs?
Well, the role of forest management is critical because it's closely linked to climate change issues, and it's closely related to the amount of CO2, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Forests can serve as huge sinks for carbon, and so they can play a dramatic role in absorbing CO2, carbon dioxide, and therefore make a huge contribution to the climate change objectives. So I cannot understate the role of forests in sustainable development.
What is your assessment of Vietnam's efforts in sustainable forest management in the past few years?
Well, Vietnam is showing political leadership. You have the party's decree, you have the government's sustainable management of forests, decision. You've got the RED Plus action plan. All of these are signs of leadership.
Then according to you, what are the challenges of sustainable forest management in Vietnam?
I think the challenge is going to be implementation, and the challenge is also going to be transforming the way that Vietnam values forests in terms of their role in the economy. Forests are not just about timber, they're about a range of benefits that can be harnessed in economic terms, from medicinal plants to bamboo to ecotourism. And so Vietnam needs to find a way to value all the multi-dimensions of the forests, which so far it has not done. So I think the big challenge lies in implementation. Involving the business sector, the private sector, and giving the right incentives, creating the enabling environment, is the second challenge. And a third challenge is truly involving communities, including ethnic minority communities, in the sustainable management of forests. So you need the role of government, you need the role of the private sector, and you need the role of communities. Without one of these, it will not be possible. So that is the challenge.
Over the years, the views and perceptions of forest management in Vietnam have seen fundamental changes in the context of achieving Vietnam's commitments to SDGs. In particular, the Sustainable Forest Development and Management Program in the Vietnam Forestry Development Strategy 2006-2020 is considered a focused program with specific objectives.
Nói về quản lý rừng ấy thì một cái quyết định gần đây nhất là quyết định 886 đấy của Thủ tướng ấy về cái việc là phát triển rừng bền vững, chương trình mục tiêu phát triển rừng bền vững Việt Nam 2016-2020 thì trong đó đã nói rõ cái việc là chúng ta phải chuyển đổi cái việc chúng ta sử dụng và quản lý cái rừng bền vững theo cách như thế nào. Trong đó thì cho từng loại rừng một. Ví dụ rừng thì chúng ta biết rừng chia ra là rừng thì có rừng sản xuất, rừng phòng hộ, rừng đặc dụng. Như vậy là mỗi một cái đối tượng rừng khác nhau thì người ta phải có cái cách thức quản lý khác nhau.
In this context, the transition from traditional forest management to sustainable forest management is boosted, especially since Vietnam is predicted to be one of the countries most affected from climate change in the world. However, this process has many challenges.
Quản lý rừng bền vững ấy thì cái cách truyền thống thì như vậy là chúng ta biết là cái không bền vững là gì, chúng ta khai thác nó nhiều hơn cái nó có thể cái vốn rừng có thể sinh ra. Thế quản lý bền vững này thì nó có nhiều các cái tiêu chuẩn về quản lý khác nhau. Như vậy thì chúng ta thấy rằng là từ một cái thói quen trước kia ấy, thì bây giờ chúng ta theo cái quản lý theo cái như kiểu ISO ấy, nó phải có quy trình như vậy thì nó cần đòi hỏi sự tham gia và vào cuộc của tất cả hệ thống chính trị. Vì bên cạnh cái việc anh tuân thủ thì những cái đấy nó liên quan rất nhiều đến cái việc anh kiểm soát nội bộ, cái tính tuân thủ của các cái tiêu chuẩn và quy chuẩn.
In particular, Vietnam is facing major challenges in promoting and attracting direct investment in profitable and sustainable business activities based on products and services from natural forests.
It's to be honest, it's quite challenging because we need to learn how to speak the same language. I'm personally from the business sector, and I basically as many years in the business and in the public sector, and I can witness in my personal experience that there is sometimes a difficulty to set a dialogue, to really understand each other. So business will speak one language, the government will speak another one. How do we make this work? So these are kind of cultural barriers that needs to be overcome.
The National Target Program for Sustainable Forestry is expected to mobilize non-state resources for more than 70% of the total funding. In order to achieve this target, the strategy to mobilize investment from businesses and individuals needs to be designed in a systematic, comprehensive and specific way, especially to attract sustainable investment in natural forests.
Then what is the role of private sector and Vietnamese government do to call for the engagement of private sector as well as promote related initiatives and solutions?
Well, the role of the private sector is important for many reasons. One is, of course, the private sector can invest in the kinds of products which are deforestation free, like coffee and aquaculture. The private sector can also invest in sustainable ways of plantations. Plantations need to be much more sustainable. They need to be used in manners that are long-term neutral, and the private sector can invest if it's given incentives for the long term. So the policies and the incentives for the private sector have to be long-term, not short-term. If they're short term, they won't invest, and then there's no incentive for them. You need legislation that is coordinated across multi-sectors, because if it's only one sector, it's not going to help. So there's a range of policies that are needed to create the enabling environment for the private sector to invest in sustainable forest management.
Can you share some of UNDP's experiences in sustainable forest management?
Well, UNDP has a presence in almost every part of the world, and we have many, many examples of working nearby. Indonesia is a prime example of RED+, but also we have Malaysia, we have Costa Rica, we have many others. So there are different examples that can be used for different best practices. Payment systems for eco-services, for example. You can look at Costa Rica and see that they are able to get more than $60 per hectare in terms of payments. Vietnam is only a fraction of that right now. So there's a huge scope for increasing payments per hectare of forest. We can bring these best practice examples from around the world. So there is a lot that we can do as UNDP, but also as the UN system as a whole.
Then what are your recommendations for Vietnam to achieve the SDGs to 2030 in general and sustainable forest management in particular?
Well, for SDGs in general, that's a much larger issue and a much bigger answer. But what I will say is to attain sustainable forest management, 4 things are important. One is Vietnam needs to organize new markets. It needs to provide the incentives for new markets. It needs to provide the right financing and fiscal incentives. It needs to also set up appropriate monitoring and accountability systems. And it needs to ensure that communities have a stake in the long-term sustainable management of forests. Communities are often the best guardians of forests, and this needs to be recognized. And of course, the whole accounting system will have to be modified to value the forests in economic terms in a much broader way than Vietnam currently values forests. Well, I think Vietnam needs to get the full support of the United Nations and other development partners. We are ready to provide this support, but of course Vietnam itself has to demonstrate that it takes a multi-sectoral approach to this. So this is not just the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, because there are many different aspects to this. So Vietnam has to find a coordinated approach. It's very helpful today that the party's Central Economic Committee's vice chairperson was here, because they have the ability to bring different parts and different ministries together. So that is going to be crucial.
Thank you so much for your sharing. And that's all for Sharing Vietnam today. Thank you for watching and see you next time.